Hey folks, so in today's video we're going to look at high-speed frame rates on the X-S20. Now the camera is capable of 240 frames per second, but only in 1080p, and I know there's been lots of discussion about the quality of the video from the camera when it's in these high frame rates. I thought we'd have a look at it today with some bird cinematography. So let's have a look at noise reduction first. So there is quite a lot of noise in this mode. So in the first shot that I'm going to bring up here, I'm going to sort of slide in the corrections that I've made in DaVinci Resolve, so you can see kind of a before and after. And as you can see at ISO 6400, there's quite a lot of noise in the footage. However, it is fairly recoverable with a fair amount of work, tweaking the sharpness, the contrast, and applying some noise reduction. Quite heavy noise reduction, but nothing over the top. And you can still get, usable footage. I mean, you're not talking about broadcast quality, but certainly for a hobbyist, I think you'd be quite happy with what was coming out of it. But it's not brilliant. It's it's okay. I mean, doing this has kind of made me think about whether in the long run, because I'm really enjoying videoing wildlife and birds, whether I would want to go for an XH2S or something that can do 4K. But that's very expensive. So when you consider what the camera costs, the XS20, it does a lot. And there's, in the 1300 price bracket, there's not a lot out there. I think there's only the Sony A6700 that might be able to do 4K. But I don't know what that's like. I don't know what the quality is like. I know there's a big crop on it. But there's virtually no crop on this 1080p. Next, we're going to look at shadow recovery. And I think this is probably one of the weakest areas of the camera. And it's kind of, I think, goes with the type of sensor that the camera has, which is APS-C, where they're not as good as full frame in low light. You'll see some footage later on where I compare the full frame to the APS-C, but I've deliberately doubled the ISO on the full frame camera to show a direct comparison. But I digress. Back to this, I'm going to bring up some footage here, and again I'm going to show it a before and after, and you'll see the swipe moving across to reveal how I've regraded the footage and adjusted the colour. And believe me, I spent hours doing this. So this was a shot that was high dynamic range, and the bird was almost backlit, and I had to bring the shadows up and try and recover as much detail. And I've got some detail back, but it's passable, I would say. Now, to be fair to the camera, I'm putting it in a situation that is very difficult for any camera to do. But just to show you the limits of what you can do. But again, as a hobbyist who just wants to document birds, you might be quite happy with this. As I say, oh sorry, my neck's going there. As I say, for documentary purposes and that kind of thing, and hobbyists, it's fine. For somebody doing, commercial work, it's neither use nor ornament. It's just not up to par for that. So it all depends what you want. But again, the X-S20 is a consumer camera. It's not a professional camera. So for what the camera is and what I've got out of it, would I be happy with this? Yeah, I would be reasonably happy. But I would try and avoid situations like this. Try and avoid high dynamic range situations, because I've literally spent hours tweaking this clip and going, that doesn't work, starting again and tweaking again, and it was a lot of work. And it's probably I've spent most of the day on that one clip trying to get it back to something, so I can see the colours, because not only do you lose detail on the shadow and you can see it's a bit mushy, you lose colour information. It just doesn't look right. So, what I've got back, I think is usable, and I would be happy to sort of have that if I wanted to just record that bird. But again, I don't think I would attempt to do it in that lighting circumstances again. But I was deliberately catching these for the video. You wouldn't normally do this. Now let's look at the autofocus of the camera, and first we're going to look at just how the autofocus performed with some normal clips that I'm going to bring up here, so you can watch the clips, see how the autofocus stays on the camera as the bird moves around, jumps, or does whatever birds tend to do when they're on twigs sitting there. And in general use, I'm quite pleased with, in fact I'm really pleased with the autofocus. I think when there's a single defined subject, or the bird isn't moving too much, and even if there's a little bit of foliage around or some distracting twigs, the camera can more or less lock on to the image that's there. And once it's locked on, and I brought the settings up on the screen earlier, so you should have been able to see what the settings are. Once it's locked on, it seems to stay pretty locked. It takes a lot for it to lose. It will struggle as the light drops. So if you're in lower light or you're at higher ISO, to compensate for lower light, yes, it can hunt now and again, and you will get issues with a long lens, but that's more to do with the long lens, where if the lens is racked to one end of its focus on a 400mm lens, it's very difficult to get it to come back. So what you've got to bear in mind is that long telephotos are difficult to get to focus in the first place. That's why you have focus limiters set on them. So I've got a switch that'll focus either full range, or it will focus, I think it's 5 meters to infinity, which means if the bird is a little bit further away, the camera's a little bit better at doing that. Or indeed I can turn the focus limiter on and set custom ranges, which can help with things like that. But generally speaking, using the focus limiter switch, I think it's been pretty good. Out of the tests I've done, the autofocus was the thing that surprised me. And as I say, I tried. Fuji has very limited autofocus during video, and you've got like area where you can put a little box, and then just an overall. I can't remember what the name of the mode is, but there's two modes. One's where you can just have the whole area of the screen on. Another mode, you can just have a little box on the screen. I did bring them up on the screen earlier, the autofocus mode I used. And you want the one where you've not got the box, unless you specifically want to control that box. You know, you can use the touchscreen or the joypad to move it around. But bear in mind that if you use the little box on the screen, the autofocus box, the camera will tend to focus. If the bird moves, the camera tends to go, oh, I'll focus on what's under the box, rather than the actual scene. So if it doesn't detect a bird, it'll default to the default focus mode. But if it detects a bird, it'll override that, which is why sometimes you get better results just having the whole area of the screen set, and then the camera just goes, I'm looking for a bird in this area because bird detects on. And that I found worked better in most circumstances. Now, if there's a lot of foliage, you might want to use the other mode where you can specifically tell the camera where to look. But that is one of the weaknesses of Fuji cameras, is that the video autofocus is not very configurable compared to the likes of the Fujifilm X-S20, which has much more highly configurable autofocus modes. So I can have zone autofocus, point autofocus, I can move it around the screen with a thumb, I can have area autofocus, and these are all available in video or stills. Whereas for some reason Fuji have all these modes available in their stills mode, but when you switch to the video mode, you're limited to these two. It's almost automatic, but it works quite well, to be fair to it. And I've been, as you've seen from the shots, been very impressed. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about some autofocus problems that I did have with the camera, and some issues with the IBIS. And again, I'm going to bring up some footage on the screen so you can see what I'm actually talking about as we discuss this. The biggest issues are if there's too much going on the screen, it'll lose focus. So if we bring up something that shows just a single bird on a stick or a post, The camera's pretty good. It locks onto it, and if the bird moves, even if it hasn't got the eye, it's quite happy with the focus. The problems occur when you start to, say, pan and you've got some birds in flight. And I've got another shot here where I was trying to pan with these birds and it just kind of wasn't locking on. It could see there were birds there and it was gradually zooming in on them, but it just took forever to get them. And even when I did get them, which once it's locked on again, it's pretty good at holding it. The ibis kind of like shifts like this. And you got these sort of sudden movements. Now, I think that's more to do with my panning technique being rubbish, because I'm still sort of learning how to pan properly. And I think if I used a gimbal where I could smoothly turn, I would get better movement. So I'm pretty certain it's more down to user error than the camera that's the problem. But still, it was a little bit of an issue. But once the camera has locked on, it's pretty good at holding on to the focus there. As I say, if the focus gets a little bit busy, so say you're panning around and another bird comes into view, then the camera's not really sure what to focus on and it could just lose what you've locked onto. So what would be nice if the camera had a focus lock, but I don't think it does. I'll have to look into that, but I'm pretty certain that Fuji don't oblige to lock the focus. But at the same time, if you're panning with something, you can't really lock the focus. What you need is not a focus lock, but a subject lock. So once it's acquired a box around a subject of, say, the flying birds, you tell it that you don't want it to be bothered about anything else on the screen, and that the camera does lack. You can't say latch onto that subject and you tap a button and the box around it maybe turns red, and then you know that you've locked that subject, and if anything else comes into the frame, it'll ignore that. But the camera at the minute, as it stands at the minute, will tend to wander onto the things. So I didn't want to digress too much into autofocus, but I think it goes hand in hand with how the autofocus performs in this high 240 frames a second mode. But overall, it's not bad. And again, I think as I improve my technique, I will get better at managing the autofocus and better at managing the panning and better at working out what the camera is capable of and isn't capable of. So overall, pretty good. So let's sum up, I think. I hope this video has been useful to you, and this one's really over to you guys who watch. What do you think? What would you look for in slow motion? Do you use slow motion? What cameras have you used? What problems have you run into? Stick them in the comments below. I'd love your feedback. This was a video in response to a comment from a viewer who'd asked, what the 240p on the X-S20 was like. I think my sort of appraisal of it would be that from a hobbyist perspective, which I'm really mostly a hobbyist, it is suitable. It's not the best in class, but it's certainly good. And it's lovely to look at birds in slow motion. It's something I haven't done much. I haven't done a lot of slow motion photography. I'm really new to it, or videography or cinematography, whatever you call it. So thank you for the question, because I didn't realise how much I liked slow motion, and watching birds in slow motion is wonderful to see, because you just see details. I recorded a bird the other day. It was at like super high ISO, and it was digging around behind the bark. I'll just bring some little footage up there now, trying to find grubs, I would imagine, or food, and I was like, wow, it's using its wings to balance and things like that. And this is where slow motion comes in. It's not just like the techie side of it, of what's the best camera for it. From a hobbyist or a person who likes birds and wildlife, can you get detailed information about the birds and their behaviour? Absolutely you can with the X-S20. Everything you need. So from that perspective, you can get a very budget-friendly camera with, the 100 to 400 lens, and it works out really, really well. Now, the other part I wanted to finish off with as well is a comparison. So we've got some straight out of camera footage. First of all, we're going to bring up the Lumix S5. which I've deliberately shot at ISO 4000, simply because the S5, being a full frame camera, is about to stop faster. Although I did shoot this in cropped mode, to be fair, and the S5 is quite incredible when it comes to image quality, and I think it's the lower pixel density. Even in crop mode, it's got lower pixel density than the Fuji. So you know, you've got 26 megapixels on the APS-C versus about 16 when you're in crop mode. So the Lumix is always going to be about a stop of light better. And if we bring up the X-S20 straight out of camera, these are going to have been corrected very slightly for exposure. No sharpening, nothing like that. They're essentially straight out of camera. We've got ISO 2000 on the X-S20, and I think there's a little bit more noise, if I'm honest. But the detail is similar. Maybe a little bit more on the X-S20, but only because I was a little bit closer to the same bird. The bird isn't always obliging, sitting in the same location. So, but if I was to look at it overall, if I was comparing full frame with cropped, you're always going to get more detail on a full frame camera. But comparing it to a full frame camera, not too bad, actually. So there you go. I hope that, as I say, the video was useful. And I will catch you all later, folks. Bye.